Okay, good morning, folks. Welcome, Harris County. It is Thursday. It is the first Thursday of the month. Welcome to June. It's 10 a.m. and it is time for the Homegrown Lecture Series. So I want to welcome you all here today. We are glad that you could join us. And today, for our June offering, Brandi Keller will be speaking on 10 reasons for yellowing leaves. You can see the agenda for the rest of the year. Next month, I'll be back. I'll be talking about pest and disease issues in the garden. We'll also be covering safety in the home garden in the next quarter, and also all about mint. So I want to welcome you all. If you do have any questions, please post them in the Q&A in the chat there. We will either answer them directly or we will pose them to Brandi as she proceeds through the presentation. So without any further ado, I will toss it on over to Brandi. So Brandi, take it away.
All right, good morning. Well, welcome everyone. Let's see, let me get past the slide. Yeah, thank you, Paul, for that intro, and he is next. So today is 10 reasons for yellow leaves. I'm sure I've learned a couple things, so I'm happy to pass that along to you. What we'll cover today, we really have to start with photosynthesis, transpiration, and respiration, just to kind of explain why even, leaves have their colors. We'll go over the 10 reasons. Some of them are going to be more in depth than others, but that's because there are certain ones that are more complicated and more common. And then the quiz, I mean, it's like 3 photos, so it's like it kind of looks all dramatic on there, quiz, but don't worry, there's no grades. So basically, okay, so yellow leaves, what does that mean? So if like all these environmental just conditions that are required really aren't met, then plants can really start to show symptoms. You can see my little sad face in the middle, so maybe one of them was disrupted. We'll go over these components and it won't thrive. And then once you see yellowing leaves, I mean, it can really take just plucking some of them off to get rid of it, or it can take weeks and maybe even sometimes months to recover. So we're going to go way back to one of these basic pictures when talking about photosynthesis. So as that first slide depicted, there really are 3 things required for plants to live: photosynthesis, transpiration, and respiration. Photosynthesis is what you see right here. It really means, like plants create their own food. They need the energy from the sun, CO2 from the air, and then water from the soil. So all 3 of those components are really important. If you take any one of those away, they're just not going to thrive. Oh, that didn't change the slide. Okay, so this looks kind of complicated, but it's just a common diagram of a tomato plant talking about these 3 aspects of why plants even, are able to be. So with photosynthesis, you need those 3 things that we just talked about: the energy, carbon dioxide, and water. What photosynthesis does is, in short, it just converts them to carbohydrates, starches, and sugars. That respiration over to the right, that takes those carbohydrates and it converts it back into energy. And then, of course, as we all know, plants release oxygen. So it releases that. Transpiration is really cool. By definition, it's like the exhalation of water vapor through the stomata. Stomata, we're not going to get into. That would be really fun though, busting out the microscopes. But they are cells that are in the leaf surface that open and close. And generally throughout the day, you know, the hottest parts of the day are at night, they'll close. The coolest parts, they'll open to help that, you know, that exchange of water. What's really cool is that stomata only consists of, it only takes up about 1% of a leaf's surface area, but it's responsible, those little cells are responsible for 90% of water that is transpired. So that just goes to show, like, sometimes I think we all, I'll admit it too, we all get into, you know, like, oh, you know, it's fine, that plant's fine. But if you see any kind of stress or change in those leaves, it whether we see it or not, it is changing how that plant transpires. And then if a plant isn't transpiring, then it can affect the other two aspects of it. Here in Houston, I know we have folks sometimes watch from all over, but in Houston, when it's really hot, low humidity, you know, that transpiration is going to be higher. Wind, it's going to be higher. So our environmental conditions, not just the plant's health, our environmental conditions can really affect how that plant works. So there's really that delicate balance between all three of those things. Looking a little closer at the leaf, photosynthesis, it only occurs because of chlorophyll. Obviously, there's many layers in a leaf that we typically can't see, but this chlorophyll is that pigment that makes everything green. When there's fall color, it's because there's a lack of chlorophyll. We're seeing the colors that exist in that leaf anyway. It's just that the chlorophyll has stopped being produced, and then those other colors come through. So going back to, if any one of those three components are missing, then there's going to be an imbalance. Something's going to happen. If you're missing the light, the water, the carbon dioxide. In this example right here, we're going to talk about leaf margins again, but basically this is browning of the leaf margins. You know, it's around the edges. So when we talk about leaf margins, that's what we're referring to. And essentially, you know, photosynthesis has stopped right there. So the first reason, and this is going to be the most lengthy one, is nutrient deficiency. And even then, I'm still only going to be talking about a very small portion of nutrient deficiencies, even though probably definitely the most common. So why do nutrient deficiencies even cause yellow leaves? Well, there are 15, 17 different essential nutrients for plants, and every one of them have a purpose. Macronutrients are used in large quantities. Micronutrients are used in small quantities. If you've ever done a soil testing, usually some of those tests are labeled by that, so that may be a little bit familiar with you. We're not going to talk about all those nutrients. We'll just talk about the big three. NPK, those are the common letters you see when associated to fertilizers. So, sorry. So nitrogen, you know, that really promotes the green leafy growth. It's part that has to do with chlorophyll cells. It's really essential in photosynthesis. Phosphorus, that's the root and seed production, and potassium, that's really how things move around. It's that the vascular system, but you know how water moves around. I put the soil testing link for at least Texas here at the bottom, because you know, we can talk about all these things and you can have, you can be suspicious, but unless you actually know what's in your soil, then you're really just guessing. If you are watching from outside of Texas, your local extension service or your state extension service should have their own soil testing also. Here in Texas, just for the basic macronutrients. I think it's $12. So really, we can talk about this today, but it's really important, you know, if you're talking about your landscape plants or gardens, and if you haven't done one, then you really don't have a baseline for what what you have. So what are those symptoms for general nutrient deficiencies? And this list is a lot longer. I was just kind of like trying to stick to a shorter list and ones that revolve around yellowing plants. So yellowing leaves, yellowing of parts or all of the leaf, or even yellow or dead leaves, browning within that leaf, or even browning along those margins like we saw, and stunting. So, you know, if you just notice a plant, you know, just isn't growing as it should, maybe it's not dying, but it's you know, not growing, then it's, you know, there's some kind of stunting happening. So the very first one we'll start off with is iron chlorosis. Really, this just means iron deficiency. The main sign is what you see right here, that intervenal chlorosis. So when you hear iron chlorosis or intervenal chlorosis, this is what it is referring to. This usually happens in high pH soils, alkaline soils. I will go over that pH scale with you too in just a few minutes. So what does that really mean when you have a high pH? Well, that means there can be iron. There can be plenty of iron in the soil. It just doesn't mean that that plant is able to, it's not available to that plant, and it actually can't, you know, take it up into its system. When that happens, chlorophyll is not produced. So that's why you start seeing, you know, that yellowing. Now, this can happen not just with an iron deficiency. At least the unavailability of iron isn't necessarily strictly tied to pH. Sorry, I clarified that. It can also have to do with high soil temperatures, high light. So there can be a number of reasons where iron is being made unavailable, but generally, you know, a lot of times pH is included. And, you know, this is really going to affect root function at some point too. So anything that inhibits root function, like flooding or compacted soils, things like that, that will also really lessen the availability. So those signs, you see yellow bleach leaves, stunted growth, that intervenal chlorosis. The cause we talked about, overwatering. So overwatering, if the soil is super heavy and basically those roots do not have any air, they don't have any access to air. If it's overheated, iron, or even excess fertilizers too. So in the landscape, if you have a sprinkler system and there are trees involved with your lawn, sometimes that sprinkler system is set up to address the lawn, not necessarily the trees. The trees and shrubs do not need as much, does not need as much water as the lawn. So if you have, you know, if you have a sprinkler system and that's, you know, I don't know, I've heard of people doing like 5 times a week or even 7 times a week where it comes on. You know, that's going to impact your landscape plants. So I have the best solution is prevention. A lot of what we just talked about, especially in your own yard, you have a little bit more control of. You know, don't overwater. You can keep the soil cooler by mulching. There's even, there are some plants that are more susceptible to iron chlorosis. So, you know, if there's some kind of concern, you can look into that. And if that is the case, then, you know, iron fertilizers, you know, can be applied. So basically, if it can't be prevented, then really what happens? You know, with vegetables, things that have a short season, you know, you may be able to address that a little bit more by working organic material into the soil. If you're talking about, you know, these landscapes, There's generally 3 treatments, either spraying the leaves, injecting right by the trunk, or there's a third one, maybe treating the soil around it. But with vegetables, it'll probably be a little bit easier because you can do the foliar spray or some kind of liquid fertilizer. In the end, there's probably not like a real quick fix, so that's why prevention is best. Down at the bottom, I do have, what does that say? I don't know if you can see it. Can you see at the very bottom, Paul, that little note that I made?
Yes, it says first, rule out insects, disease, herbicide misuse, and overwatering.
I just wanted to be sure because the screen I'm sharing doesn't show it, so I wanted to be sure you all were seeing it. Yeah, so definitely try to rule out some obvious things first. Nitrogen deficiency. So nitrogen, if you are familiar with gardening, you know that if you add nitrogen, it'll really increase your green vegetative growth. It could create more leaves, stems, flowers, fruits, roots. Of course, if you add too many, it will kind of do the opposite. You'll still have a lot of green leaves, but maybe reduced flowering and fruiting. So nitrogen deficiency symptoms, that light green or yellow starting on the lower leaves. So it'll affect those lower, older leaves first and then work their way up to the younger leaves. This is a picture of a tobacco plant. I know, totally random for right here, but it was a picture I found, showing, identifiable nitrogen deficiency. And you can see it's probably been going on for a little while because, it did start at the bottom, but it's really high up on that plant. And really, I could just see the very, top inner portion of that plant that's still green. But, that may even be a little washed out. So what causes this? It's when photosynthesis is disrupted and then leaching from root zone. So yeah, this can occur in waterlogged or flooded soils. And I'm trying to distinguish what my point here was. So leach from root zone. Oh, and it can also just be lost into the atmosphere. At the bottom, it says nitrogen is mobile, so testing, soil testing may not be reliable. It's mobile throughout the soil. So you can go ahead and use some nitrogen fertilizer, but you may not get an accurate reading from a soil test. And I think this is really the only one that we're talking about that, I would say that with. So before we get to potassium, phosphorus is not on here. I said I would talk about all 3. Phosphorus really doesn't create any kind of yellowing leaves, but I don't want to leave it out. It's more for root formation and then cell division, fruiting, flowering. If you have a deficiency in phosphorus, there can be stunted growth, poor fruiting or flowering. But not yellow leaves. So going into potassium, this is really essential to photosynthesis, respiration, and water movement. Remember we talked about that, or I talked about that right at the very beginning. So if there's a potassium deficiency, a lot of times there's a water stress that, it's just not, that plant is not able to move that water up through the plant. Potassium also controls stomata, that opening and closing. So that affects the transpiration, how much water can be evaporated from or transpire from that plant. So it's holding it in. And because of that, because it can kind of hold in some of that water, plants with potassium tend to look a little wilty. So you have some yellowing on leaf margins, as you see here. A key identifier, again, would be on the older leaves. Some brown edges, that's showing all of this. I got this picture from University of Florida. Paul will have a link for that. It's a yellowing leaves link, and you click on it and it's like real short and you're like, yeah, that's not very helpful. But there's 2 links right below it, and those links really take you to some other just fabulous ones. And one of those links took me here, and you can they have photos of listed out of some plants with that particular deficiency. It was great. So you can see right here, there's browning around the edges, nothing like super consistent. Overall, it'll have slow growth, poor roots. The cause inhibits new leaf growth. Well, that goes back to, all 3 of those aspects, photosynthesis, respiration, and transpiration being interrupted. And reduced turgor due to water stress. So again, it kind of looks wilted, which means that those cells are not as firm as they should be. A lot of times by the time this is really noticed in plants, it's kind of too late in the season, especially like for seasonal plants. Here are a couple. Paul also has 2 of these links. This one came from, I'm trying so hard not to use my reading glasses so I look cool, but West Virginia. Okay, so I got really excited by seeing this. Once you go into nutritional deficiencies for yellowing leaves and you click on photos, I mean, there's many different interpretations of this. I kind of like this one because it broke it up between younger leaves, older leaves, and then what you can be seeing. Some of the other ones may have where on the plant, at the top of the plant. So newer leaves, older leaves, and then in the middle, it specifically talks about midway. So this is just another resource for you. A note I will make about trees, because really we're kind of lumping, in this talk, houseplants, vegetables, shrubs, trees. It's just too broad. But with trees, if the leaves do look chlorotic, you can see those darker veins. Once you look into it, if those species are susceptible to iron deficiency and that soil is alkaline, if you have all 3 of those, you can really tell what it is. Okay, you have all 3 of those, then that plant is just not, it's not being able to pull iron out from the soil. So looking at a chart like this, you can look at it real simply, but it really takes a lot of clue work. Talking about these yellowing leaves today, it may be helpful, but putting it in practice may be a real challenge, and that's for anyone. It's just it is kind of a mystery. So the more you practice, maybe with what you have around you, some yellowing leaves, what your cultural conditions you've provided for those plants. So you're able to answer more of those questions than like someone else. So it just takes practice. Here's another one. Yeah, there's a few that show like this one abnormal stalk going up, and then all the different leaves look a little bit differently, and it's pointing out what might be magnesium, potassium, phosphorus. But again, there's a lot of resources if you stick to EDU or extensions. But honestly, there's some other organizations that's all they do, so they can be reputable too, but just look at the source. And I think that one, that came from Florida. that one had some other information on that link also. So that'll be posted, and just check that out. All right, so nutrient deficiency was the longest one. Watering, overwatering or underwatering. This can be houseplants, shrubs, annuals, trees, whatever. Just a lot of times when a plant's health starts to go down, our immediate action is, oh, it must be watered or it must need to be fertilized. And so I'm just appealing to you to, think through some of these, because sometimes that isn't the case, and we can already have a problem, and then we're just adding to it. So overwatering is definitely one of them, especially when it comes to houseplants. More houseplants are probably been killed by overwatering than underwatering. It's a lot easier to see an underwatered houseplant start to wilt, and then it'll pop back up. But if it's been overwatered and you start to see it wilt, then root rot has set in and it will not pop up, and you've really lost it. In the landscape, ask yourself, or whoever's asking, what is the irrigation? How often are those plants being watered? Are they being watered too much? It's about a week, or a week. It's about a week, an inch a week. For shrubs and trees. So if you're doing, if you have an irrigation set up for a lot more, it's just probably way too much. So when you're overwatering, why would those leaves turn yellow? There's just less oxygen to the roots. You saturate that soil. I said it needs air. There's less oxygen, and then that decreases the ability of those plant roots to take anything up. Those roots can rot. And then once overwatering and there's a little bit of rotting coming in, you increase fungal disease, definitely. Underwatering, on the other hand, it can look like it just has less vigor, but there's definitely going to be a shortage of nutrients too, because that's how the plants get their nutrients, is through watering. So if it's underwatering, it's not getting what it needs to. Oh, I think I skipped one. Symptoms. Overwatering. Mature leaves brown. Okay, so the mature leaves are going to start browning and yellowing first. It's kind of, like nature's way of saving the young, I guess, sacrificing themselves. Overwatering, especially once root rot has set in, it can start to wilt, like I was talking about. Underwatering, that's when you start seeing the browning parts of, or the brown parts at the tips or around the edges, along the margins. If the plants are wilted for underwatered plants, then, it's simple, just water. Going back to overwatering real quick with houseplants, there's no reason to have a houseplant and not have drainage holes. If you just consistently put some water in, you're not actually allowing the water to go all the way down to the base of the plant and have a base of the soil, so you have some kind of perched water table. Oh geez, I just lost my train of thought. I think I do this once a presentation. With the drainage holes. So you're either going to allow water to build up at the bottom, or you're just not going to water it enough. At some point, you have to allow water to go all the way through, so that way it leaches, a lot of those nutrients. Or even if you use fertilizer, if you see any kind of buildup on the surface, like a white buildup, those are salt buildups from not watering enough. Let's see. Well, Paul, are there any questions yet? We're about halfway. Probably
yes,
go
we
through
do.
the rest quickly.
We do have one.
Okay.
So this is from Cindy, and she has a blue sky vine, which is Thunbergia. She's got chlorotic leaves near the ground. She recently fertilized. Will these leaves turn green over time, or will they always stay dark with the dark green veins?
Well, you know, and Paul, I think you'll be able to help me here, but you know, there are a few different ways to get. Wait a minute, let me back up here to iron chlorosis. So there are ways that you can address some of these, and some of those are just like a foliar spray that will help them green up. But you really have to know that that is, you know, that's what it's from, that it's iron.
Well, okay, so
yeah, you can correct me.
She's saying right. So she's saying they're at the near the ground, so they're older foliage.
Okay.
So to me, that's a clue that it's probably a little. It maybe got a little bit hungry for nitrogen, because nitrogen is mobile within the plant, and so it was probably pulled away from the older foliage to go to the newer growth, which happens. So adding the fertilizer will help. Will they green up completely? Maybe, maybe not, but actually, as long as the tips are green and healthy and actively growing, I wouldn't worry about the older foliage too much. So I think what she did in putting it down the fertilizer is fine. As long as that new growth is nice and green and healthy and lush and you're seeing flowers, the plant's going to be fine.
Yep, thank you. And see, look, we just talked about the lower leaves, starting at the lower leaves. So we can all get a little confused on that. Thank you, Paul. I knew he was going to be able to help. Any other questions?
No, not at this time.
Okay.
You're good.
All right. This is a broad topic also, fungal or bacteria disease. So some diseases will kill the plant, and some just really don't cause that much harm. They probably just drive us crazy a little bit because we don't want to look at them. But essentially, they'll weaken the plants, and they can, you know, interrupt photosynthesis. There's so many things out here. I used one that is probably going to be the most identifiable, black spot on roses. You know, it starts out with those black spots, and then it creates that yellow halo around. And then as it spreads, you know, those halos can merge and it just start to turn the entire leaf yellow. Prevention is the best control. It comes back to cultural controls, you know, allowing airflow. You know, if there's a lot of leaves, or if they're really close together, there's not proper air coming through. If you do see something, cut them off and dispose of it, or at the end of the season, rake. So that way it's, you know, it's not, you know, just sticking around over the winter. Overcrowding is a big one. A lot of times when people go to plant new plantings, they do it based on what looks good right now and not the maturity. So your spacing of plants should be based on maturity. When you do that and you buy small plants, it's definitely going to look like it's really not filled in. Probably the best, you know, if you want something more filled in, then you can buy some annuals, perennials to make it, you know, look a little bit more full. But, you know, plant according to that mature size. Do not really, you know, if you start seeing some of these things and you're not really sure, don't fertilize without, you know, some kind of soil test. You want to know what's going on. And the other thing is fungicides really aren't going to be very helpful after symptoms occur. So if you know plants, you know, in this case, like roses that you have, you know, that there's going to be a possibility, you want to start a fungicide schedule before any symptoms even appear. And then, of course, one of the big ones is, I should have put this down here. I'll have to add that later, is not watering. A lot of plants don't like their leaves wet. You know, after a certain number of hours, you know, something can grow. So just be aware. Roses definitely, you know, do not like their leaves wet. Tomatoes, things like that. So water closer to the bottom. And then that goes back to, you know, Going into a whole water talk, you know, with irrigation, using drip irrigation, putting the water exactly where it needs to be in an efficient manner without, you know, spraying all the leaves. So pests. So why would leaves turn yellow when insects feed on plants? Well, obviously, if they chew holes in the plants or suck out juices, they are they're interrupting that that whole photosynthesis process. They're reducing, you know, the leaf surface, which reduces stomatas. And really, pests can they can, what am I trying to say? The pests can attack any time of the year, especially around Houston. It's all year long. You know, if you're in a colder climate, you know, when you bring plants inside, I mean, they can still, you know, you can still end up having troubles, you know, even in the winter when they're inside. Something to keep in mind with trees and shrubs, that a lot of times pests, you can have pests, like I just said, anytime, but a lot of times with them, they're just more susceptible if that plant is already under stress. So if someone calls and they have some kind of, you know, big pest problem, that may indicate that there was a weakness there anyway. Let's see. So this one is, this is a cucumber leaf with spider mites. You can see that, you know, how there's definitely light color, browning. This one isn't wilted yet, but, you know, at some point it will. It can be deformed and stunted. With this, if you're just looking at the top of the plant, then you're gonna wonder what's going on. So whether it's shrubs or vegetables, look underneath the leaf just to see if you notice anything. If this had a picture on the bottom side of the leaf, it would show spider mites and, you know, some of that webbing that comes from them. Here's an example of aphids. I mean, a lot of times aphids may not necessarily cause, unless it's gone really far, yellowing leaves, but in this case you can see that there is a little bit. With this, I put this together from two different sources. On our AgriLife, one of our AgriLife pages, it had this list of sucking insects and then the damage, what part of that plant that they actually damaged. And then I added the third part, what kind of yellowing do we see? So this just goes through the different types of insects like aphids. You know, they're mainly found on leaves and stems, and then that symptom could be curled, stunted, or stippled. Leaf hoppers, I haven't had much experience with personally, but they do something what's called hopper burn, which is like this marginal chlorosis, like around the edging, and then eventually, you know, that can just brown, so creating tip burn. Sometimes that particular one, or for this one, it can kind of be confused sometimes with herbicide injury or nutritional deficiencies, but sometimes that works the other way too. You know, herbicide injuries can look like nutritional deficiencies, and that's where us just knowing what we're doing, you know, if you know that nothing's been sprayed, then, you know, we can cross that one out. We'll talk about that one in a minute. Fertilization, really this is excess fertilization. You know, why would the leaves turn yellow again? Excessive amounts. So if you use a soluble fertilizer with the slow release, sometimes those combinations have been applied improperly and it basically burns it. Poor drainage. If you have poor drainage and you're trying to fertilize, that can essentially concentrate that fertilizer. The soil moisture is too dry. Change in fertilizer and water. So what that addresses is, you know, if you bought something that just came from the greenhouse And, they took care of it. They fertilize it. They had a schedule with fertilizer and water, and then it goes to a store, and then it ends up at your house. There's been that change. So there can be, just some effects from that plant adapting to not having that schedule anymore. And when the bottom part burned roots, when, if fertilizer does end up burning the roots, obviously that's root failure. So what we have here is I talked about that that pH scale. So plants do best between, I don't know, like 6 and 7.5. I think it's somewhere around there. Anything lower than that is acid. Anything higher than that is alkaline. When it's in the neutral zone, nutrients are able to be taken up through that plant much more efficiently. Once it goes to either ends of those extremes, the nutrients are going to become unavailable again. Rain doesn't necessarily dissolve excess fertilizer, so we can't really rely on that. Where was I going with this? Boy, I'm so distracted. So the acid. Okay, I think we're just going to go into the next slide. I don't know if this talks about pH. So, and you know what, let me go back. I think when fertilizer, I think what I was going to say was when fertilizer accumulates, it can accumulate those salts, which can affect that pH balance. That's what it was. All right, symptoms. So yellowing and wilting, the tip margins. So this is not talking about starting at one end and going up. This is just general tip margins, nutrient deficiencies. So this example I took was of a blueberry plant. It was kind of hard to find an easy reference. But this one's a blueberry. It had some fertilizer burn. You can see that leaf scorching on the edges. Eventually, if there's an improper application of fertilizer, it will affect the roots. That can increase disease, weaken plants. And I don't know, I think in general, from what we hear and see in extension, probably over-fertilizing probably is more often with houseplants. It can definitely happen anytime, but houseplants probably a little bit more. Herbicide injury. This is a hot topic, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. So really, why would the leaves yellow? Well, it moves through, the herbicide moves through the foliage tissue. It could be applied accidentally on it, or it could be from the wind. Really, any kind of improper use of herbicides. Contact herbicides, they act systemically, so it's gonna affect every part of that plant. Symptoms, that's a long list. Affects the youngest leaves and shoots first, so that can be an identifier. Well, and if you're familiar, if there was an herbicide application, sometimes you'll only see damage on that one side where it was applied. But again, this is really general, when it comes to other people, not us applying herbicides that we may suspect our plants, have been affected. It's just really hard to pinpoint. It can look like some other things that we talked about too. But this example right here shows the browning around the edges, but it's not always going to look like that. There are so many different so many different variations of what this can look like. But I wanted to at least address it. The biggest thing, if you are applying, is Definitely do not apply on a windy day. Do not apply on a rainy day because that just might be wasting money. And always follow those label directions and instructions. Transplant shock. So trees and shrubs, really anything, but mainly trees and shrubs can experience transplant shock. That could be from some kind of improper transplanting or maintenance. Some plants may be able to recover, and it's not a big deal, and some plants may not. And some problems that you have down the road, like a couple years down the road, may actually be from that initial transplant shock. So it can happen when there's any kind of stress from being moved from an original, like wherever they originally started out, to a new location. I'm going to generally say that this probably is a little bit more common with bare root, but it can happen really anywhere, especially if there's improper planting. The roots aren't totally covered. You know, it's not being watered properly for a new planting. So there's a lot of different options there. So why poor cultural practices? So that's what I'm stressing right here. Some of the transplant shock is going to be, we're not going to have control of. There's a good deal that, you know, we would plant things at the proper time. That's why there's an Arbor Day in Texas in the beginning of November, and it's not in the National Arbor Day in April. Properly planting those trees, use the original soil, don't amend it. I know years ago we were told to amend it, but use the original soil. And then water properly. You know, watering the first couple times of a new plant probably isn't going to properly establish that plant. You really have to commit a little bit more time. Symptoms, leaf scorch, poor leaf color. I don't have a picture of this one. Stunting, and even premature leaf drop. So at least right now, at least in this group, this was the first time we've seen that particular symptom. Going back to planting, I do want to just comment real quick. If you amend the soil and you don't use the native surrounding soil, it's not just a soil issue and a root issue, it's a watering issue. Basically, if there's a real porous soil all around the roots and then it's surrounded by hard clay, then that water is just going to end up being like a basin, and that water will just sit there and accumulate, and we're never going to be able to see that. I mean, how are we going to see that? And so that can have long-lasting effects. So use the same soil and plant properly. And also, you know, there's the root flare on the tree. I'll just plug this in. You know, be sure you're not planting higher up on the tree and covering that. You're just putting more trunk surface around that soil that then disease and pests can get in there. In the last slide, look, I shoved them all onto one slide. You know, because these are kind of, you know, obvious. Light, I would say light with houseplants is probably more noticeable to us, but, you know, there's certainly times in our yard where we're like, no, I want that plant. I know it's not the best conditions and it just doesn't thrive. You know, the green may be a lighter green. There are, you know, it's just plant what you should, where you should, but also take into consideration if you're in Houston, you know, some plants that have a label like it's high heat, this is where the tricky part comes in. You know, they actually need a little bit of shading just because, you know, that tag was really meant for generally across the United States, and we're just so intense here. Temperature change, we've had the freezes, so, you know, there were, you know, I don't have to explain those leaf changes. And age, some plants just they get their leaves get older or their leaves get yellow, start getting yellow, and then they drop when they get older. I don't know, there's a little bit of a delay when we're on live like this, but I'll just ask, does anyone know what is going on with this photo to the right? And put in your answers, see if you can come up with some guesses. This is another, I don't know, another reason to keep in mind why plants yellow. But go ahead and put those in, and I'm going to go ahead to the next slide. And then after the next slide, I'll ask Paul for your answers. So any ideas why this leaf has this yellow on it? It's not along the edges. It's not interveinal. Okay. All right, so oh, you know what? I forgot to give Paul this link, but I wanted to give a plug for AgriLife Today. A lot of times they have really current seasonal information, and this is an example from last year. It says right here, one of our vegetable specialists, it's Joe Masabny, he did this article on why are my tomato leaves turning yellow, and he really touched on, at least for tomatoes, he touched on a lot of things that I did in here. But check out AgriLife Today, and just in general, you know, we have vegetable specialists, we have different types of specialists that if we can't figure out the answer, there's plant pathology, maybe one of your leaves, no one can answer. It's a mystery. So that's when the plant pathology lab might come in. Paul, what are the guesses for that leaf? Any?
Honestly, we don't have any.
Okay, well, I put that in there just to, you know, a little sense of humor, but I'm being serious too, because Paul, what is it?
It's a central variegation. It's the way the plant actually grows. It's nothing wrong with it.
Exactly, that's the answer. So yeah, a couple questions we may get is, what's wrong with this plant? Well, it's variegated. You know, it's supposed to be that way. That's why people buy it. The other thing is, I know being here down this south, it still takes, it can take people by surprise that leaves change in the fall. I've gotten at least one of those questions. So, you know, if you see a maple that's yellow, here it's way late, like maybe November, December, it's just changing. So yeah, that was a trick question. No one fell for it. All right, so here's just three different pictures. It's going to be a little bit like a quiz to see if they will, the viewers are perking up and waking up. So these are your clues. Put in anytime what you think the potential issue is. So this is a tomato. It's in a container. The lower leaves are starting to yellow, and it's not super mature either. The plant isn't. So the lower leaves are starting to yellow, and there's just a little bit of stunting going on. So Paul, let me know if there, and I have to account for this delay. See if we have any.
No comments yet.
Oh, is everybody awake? Are you awake?
They're still on Memorial Day weekend.
No,
oh, here we go. We got from Liam, needs nitrogen. We've got fungus. We've got from Farida, blight. We've got overwatering. We've got iron chlorosis. Water.
Okay.
Overwatering, nitrogen deficiency.
Okay, so basically you all guessed everything that we went over. No, that's fine. Okay, so in this instance, looking at the word container, that would, whoops, no. Okay, looking at the word container, you know, and obviously this was really general, just to get your brains thinking. But in a container, the first thing I would think is, what's the watering schedule? you know, all those leaves. It looks like there could be a little interveinal on that one back leaf, but they're mainly all yellow. So in this case, it was just under watering. It just has not been watered enough. And with tomatoes, if you do not water them enough, or if you keep them, you don't want to keep them too wet, but a lot of times they're not watered enough, and that there's a whole set of issues that tomatoes can get. So this is going back to, you know, your own cultural practices. So if this was your plant, it's your container, and you know right off the bat that you have not been really good at watering, then for you, that would be an easy, you know, that would be an easy fix. Without some of that background information, it wouldn't be as easy. All right, here's the next one. Although I already put it up there. Look at that. Look at me. I put it up there. Interveinal chlorosis. I already told you. What in the world? So, okay, so this was interveinal chlorosis. Really beautiful, actually. I mean, you know, it's very beautiful. It's on most of the leaves on this tree. And so I can't do, I can't have you guess. So this was found, I will tell you, this was found a few weeks ago, Buffalo Bayou Park. But here's the interesting thing, and this is what I will get you to guess on. All of these plants have this interveinal chlorosis. So you also have the live oak and you have the red bud. Are there any guesses on why there would be numerous trees with yellowing of the leaves?
We've got iron. We've got fungus from soil splashing when watering. We also have a transplant shock.
Okay, so the interveinal chlorosis, I did give it away. That is an iron deficiency generally. But the location is Buffalo Bayou Park. These are all mature trees, and it's on a wide range of trees in this location. So putting all those things together, definitely iron and iron deficiency, but just the location would give it away. Just knowing that, if you're not familiar with Buffalo Bayou Park in Houston, it floods. I mean, even Harvey, I mean, it probably flooded like 40 feet, 30 or 40 feet. So this seems to be an overall iron deficiency probably throughout that whole area due to heavy flooding, probably being leached out, but that soil is probably just so compacted. So, you know, we don't know for sure, but in general, seeing that wide of an issue, it would be some kind of iron deficiency throughout that soil. And it may not be because iron isn't available. It's because it's just not available to those plants. All right, so that about does it. Resources. I think I gave most of those to Paul. And I had an all about basil last year. So this year it's all about mint. So many mints, so many mints. That's September 1st. But before then, there's Paul and Shannon giving their talks. All right, any questions?
Yes, ma'am. You've got two. So Mike has a 3-year-old redbud, and he is seeing some chlorotic veins on the young leaves. Didn't occur in past years. Could this be heat stress given our unusual May?
So first of all, is it in the ground, or is it in the ground?
I would say so. It's 3 years old. I'm assuming it's in the ground. Okay. A red bud is going to be a tree in the ground. Yep.
Yep. Red bud, a tree in the ground. And you said it's happening on, I'm sorry, you said it was on the
young
lower
leaves.
Oh, on
young
the young
leaves, chlorotic veins.
Okay. Let's go here. So young leaves, yellowing leaf. And I don't know if this is really, and I didn't talk about manganese. That can also cause a chlorosis in addition to iron. Young leaves, yellowing. So are they all yellow, or is it interveinal chlorosis? Can you
Interveinal.
see those
Yeah.
green veins?
He mentioned chlorotic veins on young leaves.
Okay. So, I mean, just with that information, I mean, it could be iron or manganese. Like I said, I didn't talk about that one, but that is another one that'll cause intervenal chlorosis. The watering, I don't know, Paul, do you have, it's a good test.
Yeah, I mean, naturally, I would think it's iron, but I guess what I would recommend, and it could be some heat stress that could be causing it. Yeah, honestly, I would recommend getting a soil test to see if there's any deficiencies there, or if your pH is off, and then you can go from that. If it ends up growing out of it, then it's a temporary issue due to the heat stress.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I got another question for you. So this is from Christine. She gets confused between spider mites and whitefly problem symptoms on plants. What are the differences on the leaves? Can you go over the differences, please?
Well, if you actually see the insects, they do look different. The white flies are going to be white. The spider mites, when you look underneath a leaf, you might be able to see them. They might be really small, but they are, they're not actually insects. They're arachnids, and they create like this. I don't know, what would you call it? Like a little webbing, a webbing on there. That's typical. So if you see that webbing, then that's definitely identifiable for spider mites. White flies they're going to be more mobile. They're not going to just be on the undersides of the leaves. So I guess the first question is, have you seen the insects? Or are you just seeing what you think is the symptoms?
Yeah, I think didn't go into that much detail, but and I would say white flies you're going to find on the underside of the foliage. Majority of the time, you're going to see aphids on along the stem feeding, and the damage, could be similar with regard to. Usually aphids are on the top of the stems or near the top of the plant where it's more succulent. So the growing point or the terminal points are going to be affected. White flies can be found all over the plant, older leaves, younger leaves, majority times older leaves, and you'll see some discoloration there. But
I thought
definitely.
you said spider mites.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was. Hold on. Oh, it is spider mites. I am so sorry. I'm talking about aphids. Okay. Yeah, so if it's spider mites, yes, you will see the webbing. And I think, as Brandi said, spider mites are going to be, they don't fly, so they're not as mobile. You'll see a speckling on the top of the foliage. They will both be found on the underside of the foliage. I'm sorry, I got confused there.
No, that's all right.
Yeah. But always look on the underside of the foliage and you will be able to tell which one it is. A bronzing of the leaf sometimes is usually what you see with mites.
Yeah.
White fly problems, you're going to see browning, tanning. It really just depends on the size of the population.
Yeah, and totally off topic from this, I will say that, Paul, I don't know if you put in, I had the link for AgriLife has a problem solver. It's usually with cucurbits and tomatoes. So, just kind of drifting back to vegetables, that you can go in and you can identify, you can try to help, you can try to figure out how to identify what some of these problems are, at least on those particular plants. by the symptoms on their, whether it's on the leaf, the fruit, the stem, or elsewhere.
Okay, we got one more question for you, and
Okay.
this will be it for. So Regina's got some new clayeras in the ground, and have some of the leaves that are turning full yellow and then brown. Ideas as to why. So new clayeras in the ground. Some of the leaves are turning yellow and then brown. Ideas as to why.
I mean, my first thought would be watering. I mean, but again, with the sun, I don't know where the, you know, if it was planted in full sun. But, you know, with any new plant, I would go with either with something real immediate like that, with watering, or even just a little bit of that transplant shock with the watering. But if it's meant to be in a little bit more shade, that would probably affect more of the leaves, though.
Yeah, my thought would be some transplant shock, depending where it is and where it's located. And then, you know, just one of the things we like to recommend on new plantings like that is sort of infrequent deep waterings. Let that soil dry out a little bit in between. You know, the old 6-inch screwdriver down into the ground. If it comes out moist, it's fine. If it's hard to get into the soil, or if it comes out dry, it's time to soak it again. And that's a quick and easy way to know, does that plant have enough water? So that's one of the easiest, and you can't go wrong with it when it comes to watering new plants,
Yeah,
especially types of shrubs. Yep.
and set it up for success from the beginning, and apply a good layer of mulch, you know,
Yep.
3 to 4
Yep.
inches.
Yep.
All right, is that it? Thank you,
That
Paul,
is
so
it,
much.
ma'am.
We tag teamed it. All right, well, hey, I want to thank you all. I don't know if I can make it back to the end of the slides, but thank you all for joining us. I definitely learned a few things while putting this together, and look out for Paul's presentation next month, the first Thursday of the month. Bye.